liberal groups pushing it into overdrive now to get Donald Trump removed from ballots in 2024. And we have been speculating about how this would work for some time here. We know Liz Cheney would be one of the people frothing at the mouth to get this done, saying the insurrection clause of the 14th Amendment might justify the federal Congress to pass a resolution or to do something to disqualify Trump out of the federal election. But now we've got a new interesting theory that is being brought by this guy, John Bonifaz, and others. He's just the co-founder of the Free Speech for the People organization. And he, along with some other people with some other organizations, sent a letter over to Nevada asking their attorney general and really the state level election boards and the state level entities, the people who make decisions about who goes on and off a ballot. He's saying, hey, you guys don't have to wait for the feds. You don't have to wait for legislation. You don't even have to wait for Donald Trump to be convicted at all. It's just like your opinion. And the 14th Amendment applies to you. And so if you think Donald Trump committed an insurrection, then you can remove him without anything happening. Like at this moment in time, you have the power to remove him. We're going to listen to several clips from him where he's discussing this. And part of his effort is about putting pressure to bear on secretaries of state, who are in many places the actual entities that govern the elections. We know that Georgia Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, is cooperating with Jack Smith. And so many of these people are going to get a ton of pressure brought down to bear to remove Donald Trump, just like there were pressure on the courts by the secretaries of state and by various lawsuits brought by Democracy Docket or before they were even founded, Mark Elias at a prior law firm, to go and try to change the structure of the election because they don't want to compete in the arena where the votes are counted fairly. They'd rather disqualify their opponents. And now things are heating up. You can see this was the story over from the Hill. They say activists now want to disqualify Trump from the ballot in key states, and they want to do it under the 14th Amendment. They say two civil rights organizations, and we're going to read through a letter from one of them, are launching a campaign to pressure state governments to disqualify Trump from even appearing on the ballots. The groups say that secretaries of states are empowered by the 14th Amendment to bar Trump. Why? J6. It was an insurrection. Two organizations we'll talk about. One is Familia, Vota. The other is Free Speech for the People, and that's the organizer who we'll hear from. They're going to stage protests outside the offices of the secretaries of states in various states, one of which is Georgia, where Brad Raffensperger resides. The groups also sent a letter to the Secretary of State, Cisco Aguilar, calling on him to block Trump. They say that you can use this so-called insurrectionist disqualification clause. Hector from Familia Vota said we're really focusing on a couple states, Nevada, California, Oregon, Colorado, Georgia, to make sure that they are taking a stand by disqualifying Trump in those spaces, something the Secretary of State can do. They're calling their efforts called the Trumpist disqualified efforts, and they're timing it to coincide with the 155th anniversary of the 14th Amendment. Now, we know secretaries of state, right? State legislatures really, have a lot of the power under the Constitution to create the rules of the elections. But there is a strong trend in this country for the legislatures to just divest themselves of all of the power and give it over to the executive branch, which delegates it to the Secretary of State. We've talked about this gentleman here, Couy Griffin, New Mexico. He was removed from his position because of January 6th. He was an elected county commissioner. They removed him. Griffin was convicted, lost his job, but the Constitution notes, or they noted before they removed him, that the Constitution doesn't require a criminal conviction. You don't need one. So you can just remove him on your own. They are targeting states that are mostly under Democratic control, like Georgia. Georgia holds a special significance because of Brad Raffensperger. And these are people moving chess pieces around on a board right now. And this is happening well in advance. We are well over a year out, but this is how it started. And I remember this. I remember watching this in 2020, watching all of these lawsuits being filed. And we made little charts and spreadsheets about them back then, keeping track, what's being moved and where. So this is happening now. And I think it's going to actually be a legitimate effort, right? Every time Trump gets indicted again, they're going to say, see another indictment, see another indictment. And they're not even going to care about the convictions because they don't care about due process of law. They care about winning. So this guy, we're going to listen to a couple clips from him, and then we will read through the letter. But he is apparently a constitutional attorney, he says, out of Amherst, Massachusetts, on Twitter, John Bonifaz, the co-founder of Free Speech for People, which is an amazing name given the fact that they're trying to remove your speech, which would be the form of voting for a candidate you want to vote for. They'd rather have them disqualified, thereby taking away your right to vote for that person. They'd actually want you to shut up. So I disagree with the name of that. I think it's a bad name, but they're doing it because they're trying to hide the truth of what they're doing. Now, this is John, and he was on with another lefty-ish lawyer who wants to see Trump prosecuted, and he's explaining to us what his interpretation of the Insurrection Clause means.
Section 3 of the 14th Amendment is a critical constitutional provision for protecting our republic. It was part of the 14th Amendment enacted after the Civil War, and it was designed by the framers of the 14th Amendment to protect the republic from then ex-Confederates who were in positions of government power or sought to attain positions of government power. And the view was that they had just engaged in an insurrection in our
civil
country.
war.
They had taken an oath of office to defend the Constitution. Then they turned around and engaged in civil war, and they were not able to serve in public office again. And that's what Section 3 of the 14th Amendment says. It says if you've taken an oath of office to defend the Constitution, and then you engage in insurrection, you're barred from ever serving in public office again. But importantly, they didn't restrict it solely to the ex-Confederates. They had a debate on that, and they were clear that they were also going to apply it to any future insurrection. And now, for the second time in our nation's history, we've had an insurrection, January 6, 2021, and Section 3 of the 14th Amendment must be applied to anyone who's taken an oath of office and then turned around and engaged in that insurrection.
All right, so our second insurrection in America. Wow. All right. So now it sounds like a 4-hour riot is the equivalent that in my opinion was largely allowed and orchestrated by our own government, is now an equivalent to the Civil War. Like, is this guy hanging out with Joe Biden too much, or Kamala Harris? They think that was literally the greatest attack on our democracy since the Civil War. They've said that many times in many speeches. They're nuts. But I think that's how these people think. Like, the Civil War lasted years, resulted in hundreds of thousands of dead. I mean, it was brutal. A horrific thing. And January 6th is the same as that? Even in the same conversation? It's like a laughable thing. But they wake up and they think Trump is going to seize power in this country or something. It's bizarre. This is more important. This is where they say how they're going to get this done. What is the mechanism by which they can accomplish this? We were long wondering, is this going to be a judiciary committee, a resolution that works its way up and it passes the House? But they don't have control of the House. So it's not going to come from a Republican Congress. And Joe Biden is a disaster, so they can't really rely on him to just beat Trump effectively if Trump is the nominee. They'd rather disqualify him. So how do they do it? If they don't control the House, and if maybe their prosecutions are not going to result in Trump being imprisoned, I mean, they're going at it that way too. How else can they do it? Take him off the ballots.
There's nothing in the language of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment that requires, for example, a prior conviction or even a prior indictment or a tribunal of any kind having to rule before those who are in charge of regulating state ballots enforce Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. So we've been calling on secretaries of state and chief election officials all across the country to apply the mandate of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment based on their own authority to regulate the state ballot. So, for example, Glenn, the Constitution does not allow a 15-year-old to run for president of the United States or to run for Congress, for that matter. And any secretary of state who received a petition from a candidate of that age, and my daughter's that age, I think she'd be a great candidate, but anyone who received a petition to be on the ballot at that age for that kind of office would be automatically barred based on the Constitution, based on the age qualification. There's also a citizenship qualification, there's a residency qualification,
right.
And
all mechanical.
Following the 14th Amendment, there's a qualification that you must have not taken an oath of office and then engaged in insurrection if you want to serve in public office. So the enforcement of this really goes to the secretaries of state and the chief election officials who are in charge of regulating state ballots. It's also true that during the Reconstruction era, when the 14th Amendment had just been enacted, the Justice Department, federal prosecutors were engaged in removing people from public office who were ex-Confederates and based on Section 3 of the 14th Amendment were no longer allowed to stay in office.
Yeah, so the DOJ went and prosecuted anybody who was a Confederate. And they just said, hey, you can't be in an office anymore. You're removed and you're gone now. That was the prosecutors going after their political opponents. At that time, it was enemies of the country. I mean, it was a civil war, right? And so he is giving us this example of when the DOJ was prosecuting or using this power to remove people, right? He's literally in a state of war after the Civil War. And now he wants Trump removed from the ballots. But you can see here he's intimating that the Department of Justice also has a lot of leeway, man. Maybe they should go remove him too. And guess what? They are. They're prosecuting him. They're coming at this from both sides. One removing him from the ballots, the other prosecuting him with the DOJ.
Justice Department could be doing that again today.
They are.
But that's a separate matter and outside of the hands of a nonprofit to enforce. But certainly secretaries of state have the authority and responsibility, in our view, to enforce this mandate.
Secretaries of state have the responsibility to enforce this mandate. And so let's take a look at the letter now. Now, this one went over to Nevada, and I think that there will be a lot more of these to come. You see, this one got sent to the Secretary of State. His name is Francisco Aguilar. They say, Dear Secretary, in the months leading up to January 6th, they give us the whole rundown, but this comes from Free Speech for the People and Me, Familia, Vota. But they say the 14th Amendment to the Constitution makes Trump constitutionally ineligible to appear on any future ballot based on his engagement in the insurrection. This Secretary of State, I guess, according to the 14th Amendment, is now empowered to be judge, jury, and executioner and just decide on their own whether somebody can run or not. We write to request that you exercise your authority and obligation to exclude Mr. Trump from the ballot. Can you imagine, like, being on this team? Like writing this and just being, I mean, it's like cheating, you know, it's just like you're just a bunch of cheaters. It's like, yeah, I'll race you to the corner block. And then the kid shows up with a letter and he's like, no, you can't run because you've got the wrong sneakers on. Sorry. They're cheaters, man. The Constitution Insurrectionist Disqualification Clause disqualifies Trump. Here's the last part of the amendment. Says, no person previously taken oath to support the Constitution who shall have engaged in insurrection vote for office, but Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. Here's his argument. He says states may enforce Section 3 without any new federal legislation. Some law professors explained it. They said states do not need permission from Congress to enforce the Constitution. Nothing in the text or the Reconstruction history suggests that the states need authorization from Congress to implement this. To the contrary, the history of Reconstruction shows that Congress, state courts, and even ex-Confederates all understood to apply without an enforcement statute. You know, one of the things you can do with law, just take it to its logical extension. If you empower the Secretary of State to just unilaterally remove anybody on this basis, basically everything is now an insurrection, by the way. We know that, right? They say that 2 different states have already heard challenges to these, Georgia and New Mexico. And if they start chipping away at this, they'll just start taking those electoral ballots away from Trump, one after the other. They say as Secretary of State, you have the authority to process this. In general, your authority to exclude an ineligible candidate is inherent into the role of your position. The statute governing presidential primary preference elections provides that the Secretary of State shall forward to each county clerk the name of the qualified candidate. So they're referencing law in Nevada to say if it's qualified under your law, and your law says that they're qualified pursuant to the Constitution and the laws of the United States. And the 14th Amendment says he's not qualified. Your law says only qualified can go on your ballots, and he's not qualified. Therefore, you can enforce the federal Constitution. Nevada law leaves you no neutral position. You can't just take no position on this. Nobody else is empowered by law to make this determination. A secretary who sent Trump's name to county clerks would be officially asserting that Trump is qualified, right? They're putting pressure on these people. If you put his name on the ballot, you're verifying that he is qualified. And we're going to hold you accountable for promoting an insurrectionist. And your own oath of office, you may not use your official powers to take any action, including approving a ballot placement that would facilitate an insurrectionist's attempt to obtain office. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. You know, you took an oath to support this, and allowing a known insurrectionist to appear on the ballot is inconsistent with your obligation and your oath of office to support the Constitution. They say Trump did not attack the Capitol, but neither did Jefferson Davis. As set forth, I have the authority. And they say he's ineligible to appear on the presidential primary ballot in Nevada. So they want him off the presidential primary, 13 pages. And that is pressure coming out from these people at freespeechforpeople.org, going to secretaries of state. That's going to be the attack vector to get Trump removed. And one of the secretaries of state, as we know, is coming under a lot of pressure here out of Georgia. And Jack Smith is investigating him, and it is heating up. It says Trump is facing a nightmare scenario now as top Republicans are cooperating with Jack Smith We know Rusty Bowers was working with him. Rudy Giuliani talked to him for 8 hours. Bowers said he's hesitant to talk about the details, but he was in there talking about the Oval Office. Here, federal investigators have also gained the cooperation of former top GOP officials, including Bowers and also Brad Raffensperger. Investigators are honing in on incriminating conduct by Trump and phone calls. We know that he called several people, called Rusty Bowers, and he also called Brad Raffensperger. Bowers testified to the J6 committee, and they're really trying to crack the shell of all of his attorneys so that they can get inside and get access to what happened inside the Oval Office. CNN says that special counsel prosecutors want to know more about what happened at the White House, specifically interested in a chaotic Oval Office meeting that took place in the final days of the Trump administration. Apparently, the president considered some of the most desperate proposals, they say, to keep him in power. White House counsel was objecting. CNN got another leak. They just keep leaking. Sources told CNN that investigators have asked several witnesses before the grand jury and during interviews about the meeting, which happened about 6 weeks after Trump lost. Last month, for 2 days, Giuliani sat down with investigators. Prosecutors have inquired about 3 outside Trump advisors who also participated there, including names we recognize: Sidney Powell, Michael Flynn, and Patrick Byrne. Byrne responded, they say, "Hi, Jack Smith. I take all responsibility. Best of all, with my eidetic memory, I can tell you amazing detail about it. Parrot-like, say some. Call collect, I'm here to..." Both Powell and Byrne previously spoke at length under oath about the meeting and other topics, and the special counsel is digging in. During the heated Oval Office meeting in December 2020, outside advisors faced off with top West Wing attorneys over a plan to have the military seize voting machines in crucial states. They also named Powell as special counsel, and they want more information about that as well. Among other witnesses, former National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien. There were screaming matches, and so Jack Smith is going to be digging in on that one as well. But the different lefty groups and their efforts to remove Trump, I think, are just warming up. I think we'll see a lot more of them to come, and they'll be targeting different states, and we'll see. I'm sure there will be another emergency at some point that will be used to justify some more changes in how this country does things. But this one is a very pernicious attack because it doesn't even require, according to them, any due process. Just one simple Secretary of State can say, "Insurrection!" Keep Trump off the ballot. We, of course, will continue to cover this, and thank you for subscribing, my friends, wherever it is you're watching.